Hi everybody, I'm Ian Sepperman from Mobile Dev HQ. I've got Roby Ganguly from Attentive and Ryan Morrell from PlacePlay with me, and we've got the mascot Darwin as well. So in this series we've been talking a lot about cost to acquire customers, specifically how it feels like user acquisition prices are inflated, we're up to $3, and whether or not this is sort of an untenable position for mostly for the game industry, but for the app industry as a whole. And so we've gone over a couple of the sort of immediate effects of this, but what do we think the long-term effects of such high cost to acquire customers is going to be?
Yeah, so the first thing I would say, this is great for me because we sell some of this stuff, and so from a revenue perspective, it's fantastic.
Yeah.
I think, and this started with John Jordan's article from earlier this week about whether or not this kills mobile games in the long run. I think I disagree with that thesis, right? I think in the long term, this leads us to a point where people get much better about when they're selling their users, how they're engaging them, where they're acquiring them from. Because although there's a bunch of really great tools to understand whether or not someone came from channel A, B, C, or D, those still aren't perfect. And I've heard as much as like 20 to 30% discrepancies in the data, so it's a problem. So I think it creates a lot of opportunity for people to get a really good understanding of their acquisition costs and their lifetime value costs. And it creates a lot of opportunity for smaller developers to get smarter about when they're actually selling their users. But I don't think it kills the industry by any means.
Sure.
I don't think it kills it. I think that one of the things that needs to happen, or is already happening, is that perception of the market has to change. And what I mean by that is that in the sort of pre-mobile gaming age, we had an idea about what it looked like to be in the games industry, and you knew there were big players and they were going to be dominant. They had most of the market, and independent was a smaller portion. There were some things that were really interesting, allowing you to distribute your games. But when mobile games, and in particular when the iTunes App Store came out, all of a sudden people said, oh, I can be an independent developer and I can be rich. I can make a huge amount of money really fast. I can have a huge audience. And there was maybe this view that most of the market was going to be independent developers. And I think what we're seeing is, no, it's going to play out similarly. Like, there are going to be big players that are going to own the majority. There might be a much bigger piece for independent folks than there was before, just because the tools and the distribution and a lot of things we talked about. But this is going to shake out like we've seen other industries shake out.
So what happens when, assuming that there's artificially inflated prices right now, what happens when the prices come down to the big guys and smaller guys can compete more? Will we see the bigger guys artificially inflated again? Will we see the smaller guys compete and level the playing field more? What do you think about that?
I think that some of the math that we don't see about what your retention looks like versus what a big company's retention looks like might be part of the answer to that. So as prices come down, prices might be coming down because the bigger guys are saying, okay, we can't afford to do this. We have really poor retention. Maybe 20% of our people are here a month from now and 5% are here 6 months from now. And so we just can't afford to keep spending $3, and they bring the price down. What we might see on the other end is that as some of the independent developers and medium-sized publishers are more focused on customer retention, and they're moving their internal retention rates up, they're actually able to take advantage of that situation and say, okay, now you, Mr. Big Publisher, have come to a rational place. We can actually compete on a level playing field, and by the way, we have an advantage. Our retention's higher.
Right. What about you?
Yeah, so I think this is a hard question. I'm not sure I have a really defined thought on this. I think there's one of the challenges that we face right now, I think, in mobile advertising as a whole is kind of the commoditization of people and eyeballs. And how do you avoid that, right? Because right now, we focus on location-based advertising. So at some point in the future, within 18 months, that will be totally irrelevant. Who cares? Because everyone will have that, right? Then it's demographic data. Okay, well, who cares? Everyone has that. So now you've created a commodity, which is really bad, right? So I think the way that we might start to see this shake out is people getting smarter about what segments of the population and what segments of the app population they want to target for user acquisition. Because right now a lot of it is kind of blind, right? Like, oh, you can give me a user, fantastic. It doesn't matter if that user's the right person or not. But I think we'll see a push towards that. Which will be good for smaller developers.
So prices may not actually decrease, it'll just be that they're more targeted and therefore the value of the user is higher.
Yeah, so targeting is kind of a broad word, and I'm actually trying not to use it as much. But I think it's the yield of that user will be important, right? So great, I'm happy to pay you $3 for a user that's going to yield me $5 in return, either themselves paying me money or sending the game to 4 or 5 of their friends, right? Like, that's totally worth it. The other thing that I think will get interesting, and I think we talked a little bit about this before, was smaller developers will eventually have tools that will make it easy for them to sell app installs when it's best for them. Like, one of the things that could be driving price up is I don't want to sell my user, right? So if you want to buy it, you have to pay me more than that person's worth.
Right.
Well, the person's worth 0 when they're at the end of the funnel, right?
Yep.
So let's sell them then, and maybe that drives the price down.
Right.
Interesting. So my opinion on it is that what I hope will happen is, at the top there's going to be this race to spend the most, and maybe 1 or 2 players will win it. But I hope that will lower prices to allow a larger range right below them, sort of the 3 through 30 positions. To be, a nice variety and really build it. One thing I think we're missing in the app ecosystem right now, as compared to the web ecosystem, is sort of this mature middle of the curve. When you start to, there are the head publishers who make a lot of money and they can spend a lot of money, and then there's the long tail of publishers who are trying to put together 2 nickels all the time, and the middle of that curve is too thin right now. I would love to see that get pushed out and fatten up and really mature the market.
Yeah. I think that another thing that we're talking a lot about moving pieces and technology improvements that can sort of change the dynamics, and I think what we're not discussing, but I know is coming, is that the app stores themselves are going to get a little bit better about discovery, and then other people are working on helping with discovery, your tools as well, but like just in general, helping people find more apps means that the CPI equation changes, right? Because the cost of acquiring consumers will continue to decrease as we get better filtering and discovery tools. I think.
I think that's exactly right.
Yeah. I would agree with all that. I'd kind of go back to what I think we were talking about earlier about developers thinking less about creating a title and thinking more about forming some connection with the user. Because I think that's what's really important, right? So EA is like the one example of a big publisher that's done a fantastic job creating these franchises. Where Madden every year at the end of August or beginning of September, the same people go buy Madden, right? They don't care about EA, right? They care about Madden, Angry Birds, Doodle Jump, Cut the Rope. People will go buy anything related to that, and the games are fun. There's no doubt about it, but they're not like the most amazing thing ever. They've associated themselves with that brand, and so. User acquisition is all fine and good, but if you can't keep the people engaged with your brand over time, that kind of doesn't matter.
Good, totally agree. Well, thanks guys. This was a great session on cost to acquire customers, and look forward to more videos next week.
There are certain people who are playing around in the industry who have a lot of money to spend, and their strategy is essentially to outspend everybody else. And so, because they are really thinking about it over the course of the next